Good morning, Sea Snow Network. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so excited to bring to you Muska from NASCSP. She's calling from beautiful, warm Maryland today. And also wanted to welcome Sylvia from CAP60. They will kind of be working together on this. Muska is going to be our lead presenter, and she's going to talk about the annual SMART form. So we have the deadline on that coming up. Erin, can you remind us of the deadline for when SMART forms are due?
Yeah, smart forms are due March 11th, which is a Friday.
Awesome. So we're going to talk about SMART forms, some of the common questions that people have. And then Sylvia is going to stay on the line with us today to help anybody who might have some questions about pulling reports out of CAP60 in order to populate the SMART forms. And Ms. Scott, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Hi, good morning, everybody. It's really great to see you all, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules. We are a small crowd, so feel free to ask, questions at any point because we want this to be as useful to you as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. I know this is about smart forms, and smart form data entry in and of itself is pretty self-explanatory. So a majority of what I'm going to talk about today is going to be focused really on what you should look out for in your smart forms when you notice it. But just to get us started off, I'm just going to pull up a smart form, and we have several recorded webinars on this. This will be recorded as well, but we do have other webinars that go into more detail on exactly how to use the smart forms. But just real quick as a refresher for folks, right? So this is your module 2 smart form. You're going to open it up. The first thing you're going to notice there is that enable editing button over there. So you always want to click enable editing. And I have the Zoom controls in my way, which I'm trying to move. There we go. So click enable editing. And then the next thing you're going to see is enable content. You always want to make sure you enable content because that's what allows all of that programming to work the way that it should be. Now, before you start going in and putting in your information, you want to always look out for a couple things. So first, make sure that the name of your agency, your state name, and your DUNS are correct. Okay, right? Pretty basic, but sometimes things happen. As much as we love technology for whatever reason, sometimes there will be glitches. So you want to make sure that that information is correct. The other piece you want to look out for, I'm using a blank smart form because I didn't want to put any agency, put them in the spotlight. So I'm using a blank smart form, but normally you will see all of your previous year data on the right-hand side in module 2 as well. And the reason we do that is because the smart form checks your current year against the previous year, just to make sure, that if there is a huge difference, the smart form will flag it just so that you can double check to make sure you put in the information correctly. We don't have that flag because we necessarily care like, oh my God, why are you 100%? That's not necessarily why we built in the flag. It's simply just to make sure that the data entry was correct. But anyway, so you should see your previous year data here. And then the most important thing you're going to want to check for is on this outstanding errors and warnings tab, you want to make sure you see the XML export button, and you want to make sure that it actually works. So, click on the button, pick wherever you want your XML to be saved. If you're not converting to XML, that's fine, but you should still test it out as an agency. I'm just going to click my documents, and it should say the XML export file was created once you go through that process. The reason this is super critical is sometimes, in the transfer from state to agency across different email platforms, there are lots of security settings that sometimes strip the form of the macros and the programming. So you might get a form, but if it's been corrupted along the way, you're going to take all this time putting in data only to realize that the form is kind of useless to you because you're going to have to redo it again in a form that actually works. So the biggest signal to you to know whether this form has been corrupt or not is if this XML export button is there and works for you. If it does not work, stop doing everything and then reach out to Erin and, Erin will reach out to us and we'll be able to get you a new form.
Hey,
But
Muska,
yeah.
so sorry to interrupt. If they don't see the XML export button, can they go to File, Save As, and then
No.
Nope, it's not going to work. So if the
It's
XML
not gonna
button
work at all.
okay. So if they do not see the XML button, then there already is something wrong with the file.
Exactly. Exactly. And we have seen instances of agencies where this has happened, where for whatever reason, the file became corrupt and they put in all this work and then they're, you know, they had to redo it all over again because this button wasn't there, which means it's not submittable, if that's a word. It's not able to be submitted to OCS at the end of the day. So yes, this is super critical. And then, you know, that's the basic steps of using the form, whether it's module 2, whether it's module 4, whether it's CARES, whether it's, I don't think you guys have disaster, but it's all the same functionality, right? So those are the basic steps. The only difference in module 4 is instead of seeing your previous year data on the right-hand side on the same screen, you're just going to have a few tabs at the end that tell you what your previous year data is. And that's just because module 4 is massive. So that was the only way we could do it. Then you start putting in data entry, right? And data entry is pretty simple. If you had previous year data, you know, these will start flagging. Right now it's flagging yellow because the previous year data, the form is reading it as 0, and now I'm putting in 12, which the form is built on, you know, specific programming code. So it says if something is more than double or less than half of the previous year, you should flag it. And so in this case, because it was 0, anything I put in is going to be more than double or less than half, which is why it's flagging. And then, you know, you'll notice other things like, let's say I put in dollars for agency capacity building. Oh, look, I get an instant error message saying if I put in dollars for agency capacity building, I have to select at least an option here, right? So the form really guides you through, you know, as you're filling it out. And so if you notice a flag, you just hover over it. So you'll notice that little red little corner. You hover over it and the message will tell you what the issue is. So it's saying the value entered last year is greater than 0. Last year, your value entered was 0. Basically, just double check and make sure you didn't accidentally put this in the wrong place, right? So, you know, as you're filling it out, the form will really guide you, and you'll notice that as you see these flags come up, they're going to start showing up on the outstanding errors and warnings tab as well. So there's 2 ways you could do it. You could just start addressing your errors and warnings, obviously, as you're filling it out. If somehow you still miss it, before you submit to your state office, you definitely want to go through this list and make sure that you've addressed all of those things. And, you know, this will take you to the issue. So even if you're on this list, you know, it sort of works both ways. You can double click if you don't know what this is talking about, and it'll take you to where the issue is.
This is Susan. I have a quick question. What is going to be triggering an error? Is there a certain percentage that people will have to look at to see so they know what's triggering it? Is there a certain percentage or benchmark that we're using?
So for the year-to-year flags, that's a great question. So for the year-to-year flags, it is that 100% difference. So if something is at least more than double what you reported, or at least less than half of what you reported previously, that's what brings up the warning, right? And so it'll flag yellow. And again, the only reason we put that there is because sometimes, you know, folks might inadvertently put in the wrong number, and we just want you to just take another look at it again and make sure that the data is in fact correct. And I will just say that at the federal level, we actually use even like a much bigger lens. Like you would have to be very significantly off when we do it. But for the purpose of the forms, we built in that 100% difference. So anything in yellow is going to be a warning for you, which just means, you know, hey, this triggered a flag. It may be correct. It may not be correct. Just take another look at it, right? And I don't know if state-wise you collect or review comments from your agencies, but at the federal level, we do look at any comments that agencies may have provided. So what is a comment, right? So let's say you're an agency, this thing is flagging for you because it's significantly different from the previous year, right? So it's at least 100% different from the previous year, but the data is correct. You noticed the flag, you double checked it, the data is correct, so you don't need to make any changes to this. This will still stay yellow because the form just has it highlighted, because that's just the way the programming is built in. The highlight won't go away because it can't read your mind and say, oh, okay, well, this is correct, let me get rid of the highlight. That's not how it works. So the highlight will stay, which means at the federal level, we will also see the highlight. And so a lot of things that agencies do to preempt it is they could submit a comment that says, hey, we verified these data points and they are in fact correct. And if an agency tells us that, we don't call it out in the federal review process either. So that's just what comments are for. And then you'll see instances with errors. I'm going to try to see if I can remember. So an error is going to be red, much more glaring. Those are usually going to have to be addressed. Now, there are some rare exceptions where, for whatever reason, something might be triggering a red error, but the data is correct. Those are pretty rare. So 99.9% of the time, if something is flagging red, you really need to fix it before you submit it to OLDC, because those are more sort of like completion or logic issues, right? So like here, if you selected an other in agency capacity building activities, well, you have to describe what that other was. If you don't describe what the other was, that's actually an incomplete form. So that's when red error messages come up, is when something is just not meeting like the bare minimum of what you need to do in order to complete this form. And again, everything will always show up on your outstanding errors and warnings tab. So you just want to go through that list and just, make a comment if it's correct, or if it's, look, oh no, we noticed 8.4 is showing up that it's not complete. I'm just going to go and type some stuff and it will go away from here, right? And so then that error disappears. So that's the basic gist of the form. Now, I did bring up a PowerPoint presentation just to go through sort of specific examples. Obviously, that's my name. Paige, I put there on, she wasn't able to join today because she's out of the office, but Paige is also an excellent resource to reach out to if you have any questions. She's our senior policy analyst. So of course you want to review the information before you submit it to your state office. And, we review the data to ensure that you're reporting correctly and ultimately fulfilling your mission, so that you have good data to use when you're going to analyze it later down the road. So what are some tips for things you should look out for? Of course, you want to look at it module by module. Start with module 2, go on to module 4, and module 3. Module 3 is incredibly important just for the purpose of this. I'm not necessarily going to talk about too much because module 3 doesn't have errors and warnings and stuff built into it. But yeah, if, with your regular report, you want to look at module 2 and module 4. For your CARES, you want to look at module 2, module 4, and just make sure that everything is completed the way it needs to be completed. Look at the highlights, look at the errors and warnings. Sometimes there might be a glitch in the form, just because technology is technology, where something is highlighted, but it doesn't make any sense to you why it's highlighted, and it doesn't show up on your outstanding errors and warnings tab. In that case, feel free to ignore the highlight. If the only time you should care is if it shows up on that outstanding errors and warnings tab, because that means that that's an actual error or an actual warning. We do have checklists that you can use to look at as you go through your information as well. And the smart form has a limited set of programming built in. I mean, it's a pretty, I guess now I'm going to contradict myself. It's a pretty extensive list of flags built into the smart form, but at the end of the day, it is limited to, what you can program. And there are certain things that a human eye just needs to take a look at. So like comparing your services to your outcomes, making sure that they're telling somewhat of a similar story together, and we'll get to that later. Comparing your outcomes and services to demographics, making sure that there's nothing sort of inconsistent between them and stuff like that. So the form is a great tool to help you, but it's a starting point, and you definitely just want to look at it, right? especially from the perspective of somebody who doesn't know your agency, what kind of questions might they have if they look at this data, right? What might be some things that they start wondering? So with that, some things that we have noticed, trends and common errors and warnings that we've seen that we ask agencies to keep an eye out for. Of course, anything that is highlighted yellow, usually that means it's a year-to-year difference. So you want to make sure you've taken a look at that. Notice that 8.3 is blank in this example. If you had zero admin dollars, sure, but typically, we don't necessarily see agencies that have had zero admin dollars, right? So you just want to make sure that you've completed everything. You'd be surprised. Completion is probably the biggest error that we see. Similarly here, like that example I showed on screen, they indicated they had agency capacity funds, but then they didn't actually fill out 8.4. So again, that's a completion issue. Another thing that we, ask agencies to consider, it's not necessarily an error warning, but we do ask agencies to consider is services supporting multiple domains if you're putting in like the majority of your funds there. And the only reason we ask you to consider that is because, we're also cognizant of the fact that we have to roll up this data, right, and report out on the data to Congress and to other stakeholders, right? So we want to tell as much of our story as possible. And so if a lot of agencies start putting, the majority of their funds in services supporting multiple domains, then it's kind of hard to tell a nuanced story, because then at the national level, it's like, oh, what was CSBG spent on? Well, it was just spent on several services supporting multiple domains, right? Like that's sort of an anticlimactic story. So to the best of your ability, try to figure out if those funds can be tied to a specific domain. And at the end of the day, if they can't, and it is what it is. But we just like to put it out there for consideration to see, are these truly just services supporting multiple domains, or could they be linked to other domains?
Muska, I have something. I wanted to add something to that, because I know a lot of agencies are moving from a services or a provisional service model to a case management model, and case management is going to fall under that.
Yes.
Services
Yes.
supporting multiple domains. So don't overthink, and I don't want to speak for you, but don't overthink this so much. If you are providing only case management, that's where things are going to go. But if you are doing some gas cards or fuel cards or phone cards or food cards or something like that, I can see what you mean by that. But it can feel like a catch-all.
Yeah.
And so if you have any questions about that, please let Erin or myself know. But we do recognize that there are a lot of agencies that do a combination of both services or stabilization funding and case management.
And that's an excellent point there. Yeah, no need to overthink this, but just something we put out there just for consideration. And then, as you move on, in module 2, you go to section B, which is agency capacity building. Again, you want to make sure that you double check your data points. Like in this instance, these data points match exactly, which could totally be the case. The only reason, we might call it out at times is to make sure that you didn't accidentally just type in the same data point, right? Like maybe you meant to type in a different number. So that's really what doing the review is about, is just double checking your numbers. Also, this is supposed to be a subset of the data point above, right? Because the B3A is total volunteer hours. B3A1 is of those total, how many were volunteer hours by low-income people, right? And we've seen instances where agencies are reporting a higher number here, which again would be an error because that doesn't make logical sense, right? You can't have a subset be bigger than the total. That just wouldn't make mathematical sense. So in that case, it would be an error, and you should fix it to the best of your ability. When we talk about partnerships in B.5, your state government should definitely be listed as one. Erin is a partner. Your statewide association should definitely be listed as one. Susan is a partner, right? So you just want to make sure that you've at least put those two down, if nothing else. And that's really it for module 2 for the regular report. Any questions on that before I move to module 4?
Melissa, it's just a reminder, and I know that this has come out in Erin's emails, and when we're doing, there's going to be 2 reports that we're doing, correct? We'll be doing one with fiscal year 21 and CARES Act combined.
Yes.
And then the second one will be just CARES Act money.
Yes.
I just want to make sure everybody's very clear on how that's going to look. So you'll have the big umbrella number, and then you'll have another one where we just split out just CARES Act alone.
Exactly. So the module 2 I just went over, your regular module 2 should include everything that you've done, including your CARES Act, right? So yes, and then the CARES Act is where you just pull out your CARES Act information specifically and put it in the CARES module 2. Same thing for module 4, which I'm going to go through. Again, you're reporting all your NPIs, all your services, all your demographics across your agency, not even just CSBG funded ones, unless you're a public CAP and you've received other guidance, because I know sometimes public agencies have different parameters based off of whatever their state office might have guided them to do. But typically speaking, you're reporting on everything agency-wide that you are doing. And for module 4, the regular module 4, that includes obviously your CARES activities as well. So same thing, module 4, enable editing. Then you're going to see enable content once it works. Module 4 is going to be a bit slower. I know it's frustrating, but that's because it is a huge module. So then you click on enable content, and then you wait for the little circly thing to stop circling. And it might take a while. There we go. Because module 4 is so big, we actually built in a table of contents, so you could just click to wherever you might want to go. Because if you're not doing, like let's say you're not doing income or housing services or activities at all, and you just want to jump to health, which you can't see because it's all the way in some later tabs, and you could just click on this and it will take you to the health tabs. But otherwise, similar concept, you want to look for your name, state, and DUNS. Your previous year data is going to be all the way at the end in these 3 red tabs. You want to make sure that your previous year data is there. And like I said, most important, you're going to want to make sure that XML export button is there before you start filling out module 4, especially module 4, because this one I recognize can be a bit of a doozy to get through. Same thing with module 4, you just start putting in data. We put the NPIs and services for the same domain next to each other. So you'll see the employment NPIs next to the employment services. And we did that because, to my point earlier, you want to compare the 2 and make sure that they're telling a story together. And this one's kind of tricky because this is just really nuanced. There aren't any black and white rules for what we mean by that, right? But let me just pull up an example going back to the slideshow. So, just a refresher, your NPIs are your outcomes, right? Those are the intentional changes that you are pursuing, right? So it's the specific result that your program is intended to achieve. What changes in the individual as a result of you providing the service, right? That's what the NPIs are for. And a service is obviously what the agency does to achieve that outcome, right? And so as an agency, you should consider how your services will be connected to specific outcomes and indicators. And so, like getting a job, right? That's an outcome because that is a situation that changed for the individual, but you might be providing several services to the individual to help them get a job, right? But they're not one and the same thing, right? And so you want to just make sure that your NPIs and your services are telling a story together. So I'm going to actually skip through this. When you get to module 4, for example, one of the things we ask for is what is the relationship between participants served and the services? So in the NPIs, the first column is the number of participants that were served towards this outcome, right? And in this example, you know, we notice they have well over 100 participants working towards these employment outcomes. But then when we look at employment services, there's just like 10 people there, right? And so, you know, we just want you to keep an eye out and see, you know, did you make sure you completed the services section completely? We have seen instances where, you know, folks just completely left the employment services blank and they didn't mean to do that, right? So that's the only reason we actually ask for that check. Of course, this is very nuanced, you know, as agencies, you know that it's not as simple as, oh, we're doing an employment program to help people get a job. You might be doing case management, which falls into a different category entirely. And that's where, you know, you're serving 100 people here to get a job, and that's fine. We just ask that you take a look at the relationship between these two, just to make sure that they're, you know, falling somewhat in line. The numbers do not have to match exactly whatsoever, nor would we expect them to match. And we're not even expecting a really close correlation, but we're expecting something here, right, between the two when we look at it together. Same thing for demographics. So another example, this is actually a real life example we've seen, is there are a lot of NPIs that are very specific to a specific demographic. So, you know, in the education, for example, we have a lot of indicators that are for children ages 0 to 5 specifically. And so looking at this real life example, we noticed that this agency reported that they helped 5,000 children achieve an outcome, FNPI 2A, which is improved emergent literacy skills. The first thing we noticed is, one, that they said 0 children were served towards this, which again doesn't make sense, because if you helped 5,000 children get an outcome, you helped serve at least 5,000 people is the presumption, right? But when you actually take a look at their services, what we noticed was, oh, they actually did report 0 in the educational services. And so in that case, we would ask, like, hey, you helped 5,000 children, you know, achieve emergent literacy skills, but how did you do that, right? If you didn't provide any educational services, right? So that's what we mean when we say, like, the services and the outcomes should be working together for the most part. Are there reasons where, you know, they won't line up? Absolutely, you know, but typically speaking, we're expecting some sort of relation. And then when you look at the demographics, we notice that they only put around 600 children. Well, if you serve 5,000 children ages 0 to 5, you know the age then of for 5,000 children, right? So again, we would expect that your demographics would reflect that as well. And I've heard lots of instances, you know, where, you know, there are several reasons, especially with data interoperability issues, you know, or just different data collection procedures. There might be several reasons why these numbers are not lining up, and that is fine. If you just provide a comment saying, you know, that we have double checked our data, but, you know, for X, Y, and Z reasons, you know, data interoperability issues, this is why these numbers are not lining up, that's fine. But, you know, we just, again, these are just checks we ask agencies to do, just so that they're reviewing their data and making sure that it's making sense and flowing between all the parts and pieces. Now, going back to my module 4, you know, we've noticed a lot of instances with targets being 0 or the actual results being 0. Yeah, and it could be that you didn't anticipate meeting this outcome, right? In the beginning of the year when you started providing this program or service, you may not have anticipated that you would be getting this outcome, which is fine. And again, you could just write a comment saying this was not an NPI that we anticipated meeting. But typically, again, you'll notice that anytime you're missing a target or your actual results, it will show up on the outstanding errors and warnings tab, because we just want to make sure that you actually completed it and that you didn't accidentally leave it blank for whatever reason. So you'll want to keep an eye out for that. Now this piece here, let me see if I can move my Zoom controls. There we go. You'll notice blue highlights. So now we threw in, something new into the module 4 form, which are these blue highlights in your NPIs for that percentage achieving outcome and performance target accuracy. If you've been in this network for a while, you would remember that we always used to call these out if your percentage achieving outcome was 100%, or if your target accuracy was outside of the 80 to 120% range. We used to call that out in the federal review process. We stopped calling that out for a couple years now, mainly because your targets are your targets, right? So if you're 200% above your target, when we're doing the review process, we're really looking to make sure that the data is correct. So just because your target is off doesn't mean that's a wrong data point. Your targets are whatever you set them to be, and we're not expecting you to change those targets all of a sudden because it's out of the range, right? So that's why we stopped calling them out. So you will not notice these things in your outstanding errors and warnings tab anymore. However, we still highlight them for you. And the reason we do that is because the smart forms are a tool for submission, but they're also an excellent tool for you guys to do your analysis. So you can take a look at the data and see, okay, well, which NPIs were we significantly off on targeting, and then just use that information to help you plan your programs moving forward, right? So that's why we highlight them just as a tool for you so that you can quickly analyze your NPIs, but we don't call it out as an error and warning anymore. Same thing for your year-to-year variances in module 4. So those 3 red tabs I talked about at the end. Let me pull this up again. The year-to-year variances, you're going to have your previous year data and here, and then your data will automatically get populated from the tabs as you fill them out. If it is at least 100% difference, right? So more than double or less than half of what you reported last year, it will highlight here, but you will notice it will never actually show up on your outstanding errors and warnings tab. And again, that's because for module 4, we recognize, that if your NPIs or services did change dramatically year to year, we actually expect that, right? Because community action is very fluid and responds, to the emerging needs as they come up. So we wouldn't necessarily be expecting you to be doing the exact same amount as you did last year. So that's why we don't call it an error or a warning, even if the number is significantly different from your previous year. And so that's why you'll never see it on the errors and warnings tab, but it will still get highlighted for you. And again, that's because as much as this is for submission, the form is also meant to be a resource for you for your analysis. So, you could take a look and figure out, oh, we actually did much more in employment than we did last year, right? What does that mean for us moving forward as an agency, right? So that's why we highlight it there, but we're not expecting you to explain why this is different, because we won't be looking at those things at the federal review level. The only instance, the only exception for that is in the demographics for your total number of people served and total number of households. That will flag if it's significantly different. And the only reason we built that in is because that is a pretty common data point that we get asked at a national level. So we just want to make sure it's as correct as possible. So if it is significantly different from what you reported last year, just like in module 2, it will flag yellow and it will show up on this errors and warnings tab saying, hey, we noticed that your total number of people served is much higher or much lower than last year. Just double check it to make sure it's correct. And that's the only reason we highlight it, is again, just to get another eye on it and make sure that that number is in fact as accurate as possible before we finalize that data.
Erin, I have a quick question for Erin. For those of us that serve multiple counties, do you want a smart form for each one of the counties served, or do we just do it as a grantee for multiple counties? Because Compass serves 3 families, 1 where we're the grantee, 2 is where we're the sub-grantee.
Right. No, so each county should have their own. Because it all depends on how it's in the system for OCS. And each county, it's my understanding, is in the system for OCS.
So when you sent these out, and I'm sorry, I haven't looked at them yet, and maybe Tiffany can answer this one for me. We have one for Bighorn, one for Sheridan, one for Johnson County. Is that right, Tiffany? Okay, we'll go look again.
You guys are not the grantee for those though, so they wouldn't go to you. They go to the grantee.
Right, we are the grantee for Johnson County. So
Yes, so
the
you have one
grantee
for
for
Johnson County.
Johnson, or excuse me, so the grantee for Sheridan and Bighorn has our forms. I wonder how she's, okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, sub-grantees don't need to fill them out. Each grantee has to fill them out. Does that answer that? I feel like there might have been two questions kind of in there.
No, it does answer it a little bit. I guess when we're the grantee in Johnson County, we have our sub grantees fill it out on their behalf because I don't know a lot of their funding things that's not in CAP60. And so we have had our sub grantees in the past fill out their version of it, and then we merge into one grantee report for the whole county. So yeah, that it does help me. It does answer my question a little bit, just to make sure that we're doing it right on our end.
Yeah, and that'll be up to each grantee. Go ahead, Muska.
Yeah, I was just going to say that this is a pretty convoluted question that we get from other states as well. And as long as you're consistent in your process, that's what we really ask for. Typically speaking, if you do have sub-grantees, right, but they're not the eligible entities, right, of CSBG funding, they're just getting it through you. You know, the main grantee, as Erin was saying, would be the one actually submitting the form, having collected that information from their subgrantees. That's sort of the typical guidance we provide, but of course, you know, your very specific individual scenario might have a bit more nuances there. Okay, so with that, moving on to some other common things in Module 4, I put FNPI 7A on here mainly because this one has been a challenge for everybody across the network to still truly understand, and we get it because it is a new data point, new with the new CSBG annual report, that is. So this data point is asking for the number of individuals who achieved one or more outcomes in the NPIs, right? And so the language can get confusing, but at the end of the day, what this NPI is asking for is, you know, across your agency, how many people do you know got some outcome at your agency, right? They might have only gotten one outcome, they might have gotten 100 outcomes, but across your agency, how many people unduplicated, do you know for a fact got some outcome at your agency? So that's just what NPI 7A is, which means the way to check if you're filling this out correctly, a tip we put out there is looking at the example on screen. This agency, again, this is a very real life example. This agency reported 342 people in FNPI 7A. So what they're telling me is we know that 342 people got an outcome at our agency. Well, when I look at their data, I see that for FNPI 2B, they had 1,229 people, right? So I know that they at least had 1,229 people get an outcome at their agency. So for 7A, this number should never be lower than what your highest NPI is. Because again, you're reporting in 7A, how many people do you know for a fact got some outcome? So we know that at least in this example, 1,229 people got an outcome. And so that's just a tip to keep in mind there. Again, this is a work in progress. A lot of agencies are still learning how to fill this data point out correctly. The other thing to keep an eye out for is, you know, that all demographics report, that's probably the biggest, that's probably the time where you will see a lot of red flags if you haven't filled it out correctly. Most other things in the form are warnings, but here, All of the subtotals in any given category need to match back up to what you reported in the totals above. So for your individual characteristics, that the subtotal should match up to what you reported in item A. For your household characteristics, the subtotal should match up to what you reported in item B. There are a couple exceptions to that, and that's what I think a lot of agencies have also been struggling with. Military status and work status specify that it's for agencies 18 years old or older. So those subtotals are not going to equal item A, they're going to equal whatever your total 18 plus population is that you filled out in the age. So those are just some things to keep in mind. I think those are the only two instances that are exceptions to totaling item A. Other than that, everything else should really total item A. And again, the error or warning message will guide you. If something red shows up, just read the error warning message and it will do a pretty good job of guiding you to what change you need to make here. Unduplicated counts. Again, everything in this report has to be an unduplicated count. So in the services, what that means is that you're really talking about the unduplicated number of individuals served, not the service that you provided. Like everything else in the form, there are certain exceptions to the rule. And so the instruction manual for Module 4 has listed out the specific services where you can count the service instead of the people. So food distribution is one of them. It's blank in this example, but food distribution, typically agencies report food boxes here instead of people. If you can report people, I mean, that would be great because that is where we are trying to get to as a network. That is where OCS is also trying to get to, is to get the number of people in all services. But for right now, there are certain exceptions. Prepared meals, ironically, for whatever reason, was not one of the exceptions that was listed in the manual, even though it's pretty similar to food boxes. And I don't know why that distinction was made. So to the best of your ability, again, try to get the number of people served as opposed to the number of meals. I do think OCS has been ignoring this one though. Even if you report like the meals, I don't think they've been calling it out per se. But again, we are eventually trying to move towards people being reported. So, just make sure that you are mindful of that as you're filling out the form. Now, there are some cross-module considerations we ask you to consider as well. The forms, like Module 4, isn't built to read anything in Module 2 because they're two separate files. You get two separate Excel files for those, but something that we ask you to consider, again, using that human eye instead of relying on the smart form is, for example, does your funding match up with your services, right? And again, this goes back to we're trying to make sure that we're telling a consistent story here, right? And it might not line up exactly, but it should generally be consistent. So if you're reporting weatherization dollars, right? There is a section for weatherization services. We would expect to see that you would report certain weatherization services. Same thing for LIHEAP, right? Like if you're reporting LIHEAP funds, we would expect to see, LIHEAP services reported on, Head Start, those kinds of things. Again, there might be reasons why you got the funding but didn't provide the service or didn't report the service, and so that's fine. But again, this is just a tip we put out there for you to consider to make sure, that you're being consistent. And if it does get called out in a review memo, the only reason we're asking is, again, just to make sure that you actually intended to complete this form or that you intended to leave it blank, that you didn't accidentally leave your LIHEAP services out or you didn't accidentally leave your weatherization services out. But this is an example of something you'll have to keep an eye out for using your own eye as opposed to having the smart form pointed out for you. With that, I'm going to get into CARES in the last 10 minutes that we have. Any questions before I get to the most difficult piece of this?
Okay, you guys, we may go a little long, so if you need to jump off, that's okay. I just want to make sure you guys are getting the information that you need to feel comfortable going down this path. If you have any questions, throw them in the chat. I'll make sure Muska gets them. Also, remember, Sylvia is here. So if you have questions about pulling reports out of CAP60 to populate this information, don't forget Sylvia is here. I'm going to mute myself again. Go ahead, Muska.
Yeah, so CARES, it's actually pretty simple. It's what makes CARES complicated is just the fact that we have separate forms for CARES, but in theory, it's actually a simpler form. So it's still the same logic, right? You open it still the same way that you open the regular forms. The numbering is a little off in CARES just because we added a couple new data points. So in the regular, this was 8.2 A, B, C, D. In the regular, it's 8.3 A, B, C, D, right? So there's just that, but just like in the regular, you'll see yellow highlights if something is significantly different from a previous year. You'll actually see much, much fewer errors and warnings in the CARES forms. Because it is sort of a new report and there isn't much to go off of to begin with. So, you know, typically speaking, you'll see much errors and warnings, much fewer errors and warnings here. The new data point that was added to CARES is this 8.2, where we're talking about the amount of CARES CSBG funding that was allocated to you. So you would report your total allocation here, and then in 8.3, you're just reporting your expenditures. A common trend we notice is that agencies are accidentally reporting their expenditures here instead of their allocation, right? So you just want to be careful that you are, you know, reporting your total allocation in 8.2 and then your CSBG CARES expenditures in 8.3. Very simple. Let's see. So C.2 is going to be tricky. I'm going to actually skip over this because C.2, you already reported it last year. For this year, the only difference for C.2 is that you're reporting your carryover. So an example that we talk about on screen is, you know, 8.2 should stay the same if you didn't get a new allocation. So if you did get a new allocation, you would add that on to whatever you reported for fiscal year 20. But if you didn't get a new allocation, then you just continue reporting the same amount that you did last year for 8.2. C.2 is where you report your carryover and discretion. So whatever is left of that funding that you were totally allocated, that's what you report in C.2. So an example we walk agencies through is, let's say last year you received $100,000 in allocation. You did not receive any new allocation. So your total CARES allocation has been $100,000. Last year, you spent $40,000, which means you have $60,000 left. So you report that $60,000 in C.2 because that's your carryover, but you continue reporting $100,000 in 8.2 because that is your total allocation. If you are a small state, and I dread to ask, Erin, I think you guys are a small state, so you did get a new allocation, didn't you? It's going to be very convoluted. And to be honest, OCS is still sort of refining the guidance there. Based off of what conversations I've had with OCS, it sounds like they're going to create sort of like an example that I have on screen. They're going to create like an example for small agents for small states like Wyoming, and there are a few others out there, where they walk you through, okay, well, if you did get a new allocation, what are you reporting in 8.2 and C.2? But typically speaking, it's still the same logic. You just report your full allocation in 8.2 and then your carryover in C.2. Okay. So the other thing that we look for in the review process between the regular and the CARES, so here's the other piece of it. Like I said, the smart forms don't read data from other files. That's just not the way that they're programmed. So a human eye needs to compare the different forms and take a look at them. So like we said earlier, the CARES Module 2 is a subset of your regular Module 2. Your regular Module 2 includes everything Your CARES Module 2 pulls out the CARES information specifically. And so, based off of that logic, there should never be a point in which your CARES dollar amount is ever exceeding whatever you reported in your regular report, okay? CARES should always be at least less than what you reported in your regular report. So what does that mean? Let's take a look at an example. CARES is a black and white form for Module 2 versus the regular is that blue, sort of more colorful. So this agency reported $20,000 in CARES housing expenditures. And so we look at their regular form. Okay, they reported $20,000 in their regular housing expenditures. That tells me that they must have included their CARES information here, right? Let's take a look at another CARES data point. They reported close to $14,000 in services supporting multiple domains. Let me take a look at their regular report. Oh no, their regular report is $0. That means they did not include that $14,000 that they spent in CARES CSBG, and they should include it, right? Because the regular report should include everything you reported in your CARES report as well. So this agency would need to go back in and update their regular form and make sure that they counted their CARES expenditures here as well. Okay, so that's just an example of how you want to make sure that your CARES report should never have more than what you reported in your regular report here. Another thing in the Module 2 CARES report is this 8.6. It's a new data point that was added specifically to give you guys an opportunity to talk about basically anything you wanted to talk about that you did with your CSBG CARES funds that you feel like wasn't captured in the rest of the form. So maybe you did some cool stuff with your funding that had nothing to do with NPIs or services. So you just want to talk about some of the other cool stuff that you did here and tell your story that way. That's just what it's a space basically for you to tell your story. Section C in Module 2 CARES, same logic, right? There should never be a point in time in which your Section C in your CARES ever exceeds your Section C in your regular, because the CARES is just carryover at this point, right? So it doesn't make sense if you're reporting more money in your CARES than what you reported in your regular report. So again, similar logic, nothing should ever be, your CARES report should never be more than what was reported in your regular. When we go to Module 4, that's even simpler because there's only one section in the CARES Module 4. It's the services, right? So for your services, same logic. The services in your CARES should never be more than what you reported in the regular report because your regular report needs to include everything. So for example, up top, we have the regular, down bottom, we have CARES. This agency reported 4,559 people receiving food boxes. But when you look at their regular report, they actually did not report that, right? So, oh no, they need to go back in and fix their regular report because the regular report needs to include all CARES activities. So you just want to keep an eye out for that. And now, another final thing actually for CARES, so we actually got through it in time, is you still want to compare to demographics. Now in your CARES report, in your Module 4, you aren't completing demographics because you're only filling out your services. But again, your regular report includes everything and you do report demographics in your regular report. So for example, in this example, this agency in their regular Module 4 said, you know, we helped 30,000 individuals. That's our total number of people we served. Well, when you come to their CARES data point, you know, you notice it's less than their regular data point, which is great. That means we have no issue there, but it's still more than the total number of people they reported having served as an agency, right? So in that case, we would still call it out and be like, hey, well, you know, how are you helping 65,000 people in this CARES service if you only serve 31,000 people total as an agency? So that's, again, another check that the form is not programmed to take a look at, but we will take a look at just sort of manually on our end, and that we encourage agencies to keep an eye out for too. So with that, that's really it for all of the things that we, ask agencies to consider as they're filling it out. We do have lots of tools and resources. Just go to our website, data collection and reporting, the annual report, and then, you'll see stuff like the lexicon and the checklist that I mentioned. And of course, we shall never forget module 3. If you are filling out module 3, there is a checklist for module 3. And if you only fill out module 3 if you are doing community level work, but if you are doing community level work, you should fill out module 3. And that's my contact information along with Pages. If you have any other questions, we are more than happy to help. And I'm still open for questions for those that are on the call right now.
That was very helpful for me. Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. I really do appreciate it. Does anybody have any questions?
Here's a question, Muska. If they don't see the XML button, it's only in that one spot, right? And the error. Okay. And if they don't see that, what do you think? Is there like a most common situation? Do you think it's like somebody's email server?
It'll usually happen if you shared it from OneDrive. So I know when NASCSP shares the forms with the state office, right? We give the state office a link to a OneDrive, right? And if the state office just shares the form sort of directly from the OneDrive, sometimes that issue comes up. I don't know why, because OneDrive is just supposed to store the forms. You're not supposed to do anything with the forms, but for whatever reason, sometimes that happens. Other times, yes, it is. It's kind of hard to explain. I mean, sometimes it just happens for whatever reason in that email transfer to agencies. It might not be on your end. It might be on the agency's end, but again, we just try to send them like via zip file or something like that, or we, take it to Dropbox, or you could reach out to Paige and Paige will give you a specific OneDrive link that won't have issues, and give you that direct link to the file. There is a state for which NASCSP actually has to download the forms onto a flash drive and then mail the flash drive to the state, because their email system never lets them actually, get the form. So yeah, so it's pretty interesting, and we're always hoping that we can somehow, move this off of, if we could go online with smart forms, that would be phenomenal.
Great. Okay, so but basically we should try and troubleshoot a few different things through emails and servers, and then last resort, reach out to Paige.
I mean, reach out to Paige whenever, if you want. We'll be more than happy to help you troubleshoot those things alongside you. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay. So I didn't hear any more questions before Aaron's, and I didn't see anything extra in the chat. Liska, thank you so much. But I wanted to give Sylvia a chance to talk really quick. Sylvia, the forms that we download, or the reports that we're going to download in CAP60, can you please talk a little bit about that in terms of common language that they may be called in CAP60, or different language that you guys use in CAP60 as opposed to what the smart forms are called?
So as far as the report in CAP60, we do call it the Next Gen report. So they'll find it in their CAP reports module. It's one report under CSVG, so it's really the only report that they can pull for any annual, monthly, or anything related to CSVG. I can actually share my screen if you guys are kind of interested in walking through that.
Yes, please, Sylvia.
Okay, so again, just kind of navigating to the CAP reports module. Everyone does have access, whether they're a subgrantee or a grantee. Over to the left-hand side, normally you're going to find that CSBG link. So this is pretty much the only link that you're going to come to generate that annual report. Sometimes there is a little bit of confusion. There are times that staff members come to this demographics section thinking that they're looking at the demographics of the CSBG. But you'll notice when running this report, it only gives you demographics. It doesn't give you any service information, any NPI information. So again, it's just the CSBG link here, this next gen report. Now, there are different reports that can be ran, of course, whether subgrantees or grantees are running on a monthly basis or annual basis or quarterly. So you can find created reports here on the list. It can also be based off of program. So of course, we do have some grantees kind of sharing a database under one grantee. So you'll be able to kind of see the programs listed here, which represent each subgrantee. Now, when running that annual report, it's just an ad. So I'll always advise just to kind of create a fresh report in case you can't find yours on the listing or you're having any trouble. So I'm just going to go ahead and add here. When you add a report, the first thing is just giving a description here. So it's a description of CSBG. I'm just going to go ahead and name it annual report. Say 2020, 2021. The outcome year is basically representing what CSBG year you're reporting on. So in this case, I'm going to do the 2021 year. NPI filter, it's going to be left not assigned. Okay. If I were to select a specific NPI, that would mean that I want to only populate demographics based off of a specific NPI, which of course you want to report on all NPIs. I'm just going to put my date range, and this is pretty much what it should look like when you're running your report. So I'm going to go 10/1/2020 to 9/30/2021. Agency, okay, activity year, you can leave it as all. The system looks directly at the date range that you're putting in here. If you select 2021, it really doesn't make a difference because you're still in the 2021 program year. But just to kind of avoid, any confusion, I usually tell staff just to list it as all. The system looks at the date range specifically. Here it says report filters option. So this is actually one of the biggest issues that I see when I get contacted on just reporting. This little checkbox option, you want to make sure to select that. If you do not select that, basically the report turns red. Okay, so I'm actually not going to select it. I'm going to show you what it looks like. Expenditures originate from, I'm just going to select the first option. Now, from my understanding, subgrantees, grantees don't use the CAP60 database to kind of get all their expenditure information. They may run some other service detail reports that may be helpful, but as far as my understanding, I've always known that it's not fully set up so that this report shows you all those expenditures. I know that you guys probably have your own finance systems and things like that. So I'm just going to select the first option that says services provided in budget transactions. After that, you have some options here. It says include activities from case management, referrals, follow-ups, and projects. No with services only. Okay, for your annual report, you want to set that to yes. Of course, you're including all activities on the report. Include all family members of those included through case management. You're going to want to put yes as well, because you're including all the family members that benefited from services and not just the applicants. So you're going to want to put yes. I did skip this one. Okay, so staff members have been trained to kind of skip over that. That's primarily used for the state of Texas. So again, there really isn't any data or anything to enter here. And just to kind of keep it simple, I usually tell staff for the annual report, you're basically putting everything to yes. It says include persons in the demographics report if they have enrolled in a goal but not achieved it. So you do want to put yes there. Okay, so you want to include those that achieved their goals, those that didn't achieve their goals. You still want to include those numbers there. Show more details for persons and families on drill downs. You're going to put yes. So this is just going to be helpful when you're dissecting the report, looking at any discrepancies. It'll give you more information on the person that's reporting. Automatic enrollment if achieved by service. So you're going to want to put yes here. Okay, this has to do more with the back-end method. Earlier it was kind of talked about with how the enrollment number is lower than the achievement number. So if you have like 0 enrollment and you have numbers achieving, this kind of clears up those types of discrepancies. Okay, so it assumes that if someone achieved the service, of course they were enrolled as well. Okay, so I'm going to put it to yes. So this is what it should look like, of course, with this checkbox option selected like this. Okay. If you don't select that, it'll just show up all in red. And the thing is, you'd have to create a new report. Okay, but I still want to show you what it looks like. Okay, so I'm going to save it. So once you save, it doesn't automatically appear on the screen. Okay, so that's kind of another issue I get calls about. Sometimes they say they create a report and they can't find it. Okay, so you actually have to search for the report that you create. It's not automatically listed on the screen there. Okay, so the easiest way to do that is just leave the program as select one. And this is based off of just program access. So you'll actually only be able to see the reports that your own program created. Right now I have a full access, so I can see all reports in the database that have been created. Okay, and of course the grantee can see all reports created as well. So this is the report. It falls to the top here. Okay, so this is kind of a common issue here, right? They try to update the report, so they'll click update, they'll save it, and then basically when they look at the report, it shows all 0. So you definitely don't want to see any red like this. Okay, so it says center none, county none. You want to make sure that you're able to obviously report on your centers, your different counties, the different programs. So it's easier to just create your report and make sure to include that checkbox where it says add the other report filters as all. Okay, otherwise, again, it's going to show up like this. And even if you try to edit, that little checkbox no longer appears. So you'll literally have to create a new one. Okay, but in this case, I can also just add, right, which centers I'm reporting for, which counties. So again, the kind of the question that came up, if you guys have to report counties separate, this is kind of how you would do the county breakdown. So right now, I'm in the CAP Albany database, but if you have multiple counties, you can run reports specific to county. Okay, so I'm just going to add all these different parameters really quickly, just to kind of avoid all the red here. I'm going to add all programs. I'm going to add all services I'm reporting on. Statuses. So again, the easiest thing is just to not forget to check that little checkbox. Otherwise, it takes a little bit longer to build your report. Okay, but technically, you just don't want to see any red there. Okay, anytime you see red in any of these outside parameters, then you're most likely going to have an issue. I'm just going to save that. Now, as you can see, I'm reporting on everything. Again, if you need to break it down by county, you can. Of course, if you're a specific subgrantee that's submitting numbers, normally it's going to be represented by your own program here. But as a grantee, you can pull one report on everything. So here it says update required. It says yes. Okay, so I have to go ahead and update. So there's an update all here. And I'm going to save it. It's going to circle around. It's going to pull the data. Now, I also kind of want to discuss common discrepancies on the report and how you can go about fixing that. I'm also curious to see if there's anyone here that has specific questions or have had issues currently with reporting. I'm open to kind of cover those questions as well. Okay, so you're going to know that your report was updated because it's going to give you today's date. Okay. Another thing that I want to bring up, excuse me, every once in a while there are, the reports that they're using the same reports over and over again. If it doesn't give you today's date, right, even if you do the update all, if you don't see today's date, then your report actually was not updated. Okay, so that tends to happen when you kind of keep editing the same report over and over. So let's say you're running the report on a monthly basis and you've been using that same report for months. It no longer kind of updates. So just to verify, you always want to make sure that it is giving you today's date. Okay, otherwise the report again is not really updated. And you can at that time just create a new one. So that tends to happen from time to time when the report has been used many times. Okay, you also have options to delete reports. Okay, so I'm going to go into the different sections here. So we have the demographic section, we have Module 4, Section B, and then Section A. So starting with the demographics here, okay, this is just going to give you the demographic breakdown of clients served. Because this is recorded, I don't want to like do a drill down on family information or anything like that. So unless there's specific questions, I can go in our test database, but I can definitely show you like how to clear up discrepancies. Okay, so this is giving me the total amount of families, total number of individuals. If you click on it, it gives you a breakdown of who those clients are. Okay. Whenever you see some discrepancies, like here it says total unduplicated number of persons who no characteristics were obtained, right? So there's 308 that it's showing you that there was a specific characteristic, right, that's missing. So when you start going into household sizes, education level, right, it kind of gives you the breakdown here. We have here no housing information obtained. And so you can also click on that number and you can see who's reporting, right, who's missing that specific information. Household type, and we have unspecified here, and that's probably kind of one of those areas. You have 223 unspecified. So even though that is an option, technically you should be able to capture all these demographics on the application. So if it is unspecified, it could just be that there's a specific program, maybe a sub-grantee that, you know, has confidential information. I do know that there's some sub-grantees that don't put names in the system fully. They may capture all the demographics. And still, these are kind of the things that you should be looking for, right? It says no family information, unspecified here, right? Okay, so again, just to avoid pulling up names and stuff like that and it being recorded, I don't really want to do a drill down. Okay, but I do want to talk about something because this is really, really common here. Where it says unknown, not reported, right? So it says household income percent. You have up to 50%. You have the unknown, 51 to 75%. So this is another area, right? It says it's unknown. There's 225. So what I want to talk about is basically the setting in the back end, okay, where most likely when someone is shown as unknown or not reported, that could be someone that was at zero income, but it wasn't mentioned that they were at zero income. It was most likely left blank, okay? And do you guys mind if I do a drill down? I just, you know, I kind of say that, but if you guys are accepting of it, I guess I can, but I'm not sure if anyone from Albany.
Sylvia, what I can do is I can pause recording for just a moment if you want to drill down and show some names.
Okay, sounds good.
I'll pause real quick.
I'm going to just talk about.
Thank you.
No problem. All right, so again, I just kind of want to take a pause to see if anyone has had any issues in the demographics section. I would say, other than the income, this is pretty straightforward. It's really just filling out the applications, making sure that you're indicating all the required fields, which would be those CSBG demographics. Now, the only time that things may not be obtained is, let's say you're going through the application and you get timed out. The system may save the information that was entered. So that's kind of one of the reasons. So you shouldn't really have a large number of people with no information obtained because they're literally required to be filled out. But again, in those instances, it can happen. Okay, so I'm going to move into the services section. So 4B here. Okay, so this will basically show me all the services that were provided through that period of time. Okay, so we have the employment domain. There's not a lot of employment services going on here. It says for employment supplies at one period of time. And we have education, so it looks like there's no education services here. And then we go into income and asset building. Okay, so it seems like the majority of services provided, at least for this grantee, may be in the housing section. Right, so we have 332 benefiting from rent payments, 144 utility payments. We have 370 for temporary housing. We have doctor visit payments, contraceptives, those getting transportation, receiving case management. Now, there are a couple of settings in the system. However, we normally put those settings in place unless there's new services added or unless something gets changed. We try to control the back end as much as possible, but grantees still do have access, right, to go into the back end. But they usually contact us if any, discrepancies are on the report. We can normally check what's going on in the back end. So if we get contacted about maybe numbers being too low or, whatever it is, we can kind of dissect the report. But I can't really look at the report and tell you whether there should be more people, of course. So the first thing, of course, is looking at your demographic section and whether that makes sense, right? Is that more or less the number of families, the number of individuals? Then looking at the specific services, and this could be low. I mean, from me looking at it, I can think this is a pretty low number. But again, I can't really say that. Okay, but it shows 332, 144, 370. Okay, and then 245, 241. Now I do want to just can you stop recording for a second? I want to kind of dissect these numbers here, because there's a setting as well that can control if you're only counting the applicant versus all the household members. Okay, so one of the things that I want to put, in the housing, that it should only be the applicants and things like that. And I just want to make that clear.
Muska, if you're still on the line, if you have anything to add to that particular point, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Sure. Can you specify which particular point?
That's okay. The question was, in some instances, particularly when it comes to rental payments, the question is that when we're talking about unduplicated individuals, everyone in the household is counted as a person who benefited from housing payment assistance or eviction prevention services. Comparatively, if we had somebody that you helped one individual with a job search, that only counts that person in the household, not the entire household, as a benefit. Does that make sense?
Yes, so we do put out there that for the housing services and indicators that you can count the total number of households there, because if rent is paid, right, then every child, person living in that house will also benefit from that rent, right? Like they're getting the housing as well. So yes, for housing specifically, we do allow for counting everybody in the household.
And Muska, is that primarily for all services that we're able to provide under housing? So utilities and everything would be included in that?
It can be applied to whatever makes sense for you to apply in the housing. I'm not sure that there really is, like the financial coaching, maybe, like that might be individual based, right? Because the children aren't the ones getting the financial coaching, right? But they do get the roof over their heads if the rent payment is paid, right? So yeah, so with a couple sort of exceptions, yes, you can apply that to whatever makes sense to apply there in housing.
Thank you. That makes sense. If anybody has any questions about that, please speak up now. This is a good time to do so.
So I do want to show you kind of where you can control that. Okay, so again, we initially set up the databases, but there's databases that have 100 services or, you know, a certain amount of services. So as things change from year to year, you know, it could be missed or whatever the situation. I just want you to kind of understand where it can be fixed, right? If you ever look at a section of the report and you're like, hey, why is it showing all the household members here and it should only be the individual, or vice versa? Why is it only the individual and it should be all household members? So that's actually taken care of in the admin section, so the grantees kind of have access to this. Under agency setup links advanced, you have the services. Okay. And this is basically from grantee, or in this case, a subgrantee, right? They provide 18 services. So there is, if I click on the green pencil here, okay, it's a little bit tricky, but it says count all family members as achieved in NPI report. But this is a little bit confusing. We're actually going to change this terminology. Okay, so this is basically how you can control like how people are reporting. Okay, so the first two options, let's start off with the first one actually. It says do not display family members on service page. Only applicant is counted as achieved in NPI report. The first area has to do with services and the second portion has to do with NPIs. Okay, and it's a little bit confusing, but I'm going to explain this. So this setting will actually include everyone for demographics and services, but if there's a specific NPI, like if the NPI was improving physical health, for example, because they got food commodities, it's going to count everyone as benefiting from the service, but only the applicant, right, the person that receives the food box is going to be the one that reports for the NPI, improving physical health. Okay, so this includes all family members for services, but only the applicant for the NPI. The second one does both. It includes all family members in the services section and also includes all the family members if any NPI is connected. So in this case, which is the setting that was in place, if commodities is provided, it assumes that the entire family benefits and all the family members would achieve that specific NPI if there was an NPI that was connected. Okay, so those are kind of the two options there. Now, the difference between the first and the second, normally the housing things, the housing services, we use the first option. So it's, you know, everyone counting for the services, okay? And then only the applicant achieves the NPI, because the NPI would probably be like the number of households that avoided eviction, the number of, you know, households who obtain utilities or whatever that may be. So we normally use these two options, one or the other. And then this last one, it says apply service quantity to the applicant and 0 for all other family members. So this is the option that you want to make sure is in place. Let's say for employment services, if you're under that section and you notice that there are other family members reporting for certain employment services, you want to make sure that for that specific service, this option is in place. Apply service quantity to the applicant and 0 for all other family members. That means that in terms of services, no one but that person receiving it is going to count. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to leave it as the second option. These other third and fourth option are normally not used. Okay, so I'm going to kind of skip over that. Okay, so for commodities, again, and it only has to do with if there's NPIs. That's kind of when that section comes in place. But you see here where it says utility assistance, for example. In this one, it says, do not display family members on service page. Okay, that makes it so that no matter what, it's just an automatic inclusion of all family members for the service. Okay, but then here it says only applicant is counted as achieved. And the reason it says only applicant is counted as achieved in NPI report is because if there is any specific NPI attached, right, to that case or to that family, then only the applicant is going to be counted. Okay, so let me show you that report again here. So if I go to CAP reports and I go to the CSBG and I go to my section, right? So those first two options that I showed you, whenever those two options are selected for that service, they're always going to include all household numbers for the services. Okay, and that last option that I showed is the only option that would be selected if you only wanted to include the applicant for that service. Okay, but that second part, okay, of that wording there had to do with NPI information. Okay, so if I move away from this section here, I'm going to go to 4A. And just kind of sticking to that same topic here, we have the housing. Okay, so it says basically the number of households. Okay, so that is why when you get results for the achievement, right? So you're getting more people showing as benefiting from services than the actual results for the household. Okay, now this is another thing that I'm glad that we can clear up now. Okay, because with our system, we try to advise, right, what we know. So I can kind of tell you how things work and how they should be. But at the same time, if there's an agency that says, hey, you know, we kind of report things like this, I normally tell them to reach out to NASCSP, okay, either way, if there's some type of, you know, misunderstanding. But here it says the number of households, right? So these would be the actual household numbers. Okay, and that's why technically you'd have like the actual result, right? 157 households achieved avoiding eviction. So this is 157 households. And if I actually looked at the services section, here, oh, so if I actually look at the services section, right, I would probably assume that like the rent payments avoided eviction. So that number is higher because this is everyone that received rent payments, right, who benefited. And then with the NPI, only the household is counted. Okay, so that's kind of what that option meant, right, in admin. I'm just going to cover it one more time. Okay, so that's the difference here when I provide a specific service. Right, let me do pause so I can see the rent here. So that's kind of the difference, right? Only applicant is counted as achieved. So these first two options include all household numbers for services, but then that second part of it determines whether only the applicant, right, counts for the household for the NPI connected. And then the second one, if I were to change rent payments to count all family members, then you're going to see all the household numbers for the services, but then you're also going to see those same people that are counting for the services, you're going to see them achieve that NPI as well. Okay, but for housing, it's the number of households. Okay, so just want to throw that out there. I know that a lot of times the backend can be really confusing. That's why we kind of make sure that we go in there and we set things up. There are grantees that are a little bit more hands-on and they understand the backend a little bit more. But yeah, I just want to point that out now that it's kind of being recorded, and if you guys are ever wondering about clearing up those type of discrepancies, that's kind of the area where you would look. Okay, but I'm going to go back here, just kind of finish off with section B. Okay, so we have rent, we have utility, we have temporary housing placements. So going back to, you know, how she was showing the smart forms, right, and kind of making sure that the logic and everything makes sense. Okay, so in this case, if there are numbers in that specific domain, then you should most likely have NPI information in that domain. Okay, so you shouldn't really see that you are providing services and there's not going to be any type of NPI information. So here, for example, if there's nothing in income and asset building, no services here, then I probably won't have any NPIs in income and asset building unless it was some type of supportive service, right, that they got. Because technically, supportive services, right, can count in for any NPI in any domain, okay, as long as it makes sense, of course. But again, just kind of looking at this, I don't have any numbers, right? So there's no services here. Same thing for education. Okay, there's no numbers here. So once I start in here, I have four people that got employment supplies. Okay, so now I'm going to go into Go 4A. Okay, so now since there are only 4 people that got services, right, in the employment section, since it's an unduplicated count, of course I should probably expect low numbers here as well. Okay, but it also has to make sense. So we have the number of unemployed youth who obtained employment to gain skills or income is 2, and the results is 2. And then here it says the number of unemployed adults who obtained employment up to a living wage, and it says there was 3 and 2 actually achieved it. The number who maintained employment for 90 days, right? And then we have 1 enrolled to increase, their income, living wage or higher. We have 2 enrolled to maintain employment for 90 days. So this is kind of where you start seeing a little bit of who's reporting. For one, you have to make sure you're actually tracking the goal. A lot of times I see things that may have been a mistake, but that's why even when you're plugging into the smart form, right, it's not automatically bringing in these numbers. So obviously dissecting that report and kind of seeing if that makes sense. So again, I have 4 people, right, who got employment supplies, but then I have, 2 and 3. One says there are 2 youth and 3 adults. Well, technically it would be 5 people. Okay, so this is kind of a small discrepancy I'd probably want to look. And that doesn't mean that, there's not other supportive services that someone could have received. So this doesn't mean that it's incorrect. Okay, but this is definitely something that you want to start, making sure that things on the report make sense. So there are supportive services, right? So things like transportation could have been something that helped someone obtain employment. So again, that's why supportive services are there as well. So we have education, so everything is 0, right? So there was no services under education. Income and asset building, it says the number of individuals who maintain capacity to meet basic needs for 90 days. Okay, so even though I didn't see numbers under income and asset building specifically, right, I can kind of dissect and see if that's something that's reporting, or sometimes it's the system that may automatically be including certain individuals for services that they get. Okay, so especially like housing services, maintaining capacity to meet basic needs. Again, that's something that I'd have to look into. Can you pause really quickly? I'm actually curious to see that number and seeing if there's like an automatic pull from somewhere.
Yes, I'll go ahead and pause right now.
Okay, so we
Okay,
have the housing section, more or less, right? The number of households here. Okay, so even if I say 99 experiencing homelessness, you guys would know more than me which services were the ones that, is provided to avoid homelessness, right? To obtain safe temporary shelter. Okay, then we have the demonstrated improved physical health and well-being. Okay, so this is a big difference right here. 285 versus 47. Again, that could have been the case, but this looks more of like either one, that's not being tracked, or number 2, achievement dates are not being entered, or another thing could be that this is an automatic goal that's being attached to the family. Okay, so this is a common discrepancy as well, and usually staff contact me about things like this. But I'm going to go ahead and do a drill down because I want to see what's happening here. If you don't mind, just pausing the recording really quickly. I'm going to show you how to fix some of these things, or at least how to look into it. Okay, so I'm going to click, let's start off with the 285. Okay. It's still giving me not find stored procedure, HBG populate template table. So this is our own error messages here.
Hey, Sylvia, this is Susan, and I hate to do this to you guys, but I have to go to get another, I have another appointment at noon that I have to drive to. So I think we're going to have to cut this off at this particular point. I think you've given us some really
Okay.
good things to take a look at. I really urge you guys, if there are some really sketchy things that you're seeing on your numbers, you know, work with Sylvia and Abigail together and see if they can help you do that. But I know for me, it's given me some really good insight on where I can go look at some different things. So thank you very much. But I do have to go ahead and pause or end the recording, and I'll send this out to everybody. Does anybody have any questions before I cut everybody loose? You guys, thank you so much for your patience. Sylvia, rockstar. Muska, rockstar. Thank you so very much for everything. And thank you for staying longer than necessary, longer than we normally do. But we got to go.
Right. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Please
Thank
contact
you.
me if you have any issues with the reporting. Bye-bye.
Thank you. And Muska, thank you so much for everything. I really appreciate it.
Anytime, and stay warm, folks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.